Hello, my name is Hayden Smith. I'm a geologist with Nevada King and Project Manager here at Atlanta. I just wanted to walk through today on some Leapfrog 3D imagery regional targets that we've identified for our Phase 3 drilling program, specifically to start with the South Quartzite Ridge target. Just to get us oriented, this is an aerial view of the Atlanta property. Here is the historic Atlanta pit operating from 1975 to 1985. The South Quartzite Ridge is this long ridge line that runs just over 2.5 kilometers due south of the Atlanta resource. This has previously been undrilled target from past operators. You do see some drill roads to the south of the Quartzite Ridge drilled by Kinross and some off to the west, but nothing on the axial plane of this anticlinal fold, which is something that we've discovered potentially being a really important source of mineralization for the Quartzite Ridge. So as you can see, it's a pretty massive range that runs, again, due south. It's about 1 kilometer in width at its widest point, and again runs about 2.5 kilometers along strike length and is completely undrill tested. So what I want to show today is, if I come straight up again, we're going to rock through some of our CSAMT lines that we've been releasing as of late. Here you can see in plan view these white traces. We're going to start with line 9 and work our way down to line 2. So I'm going to slice the scene and I'm going to rotate down for us so that we can see. So this is starting on CSAMT line 9. This is the northernmost section of the South Quartzite Ridge target. So to explain kind of what we're seeing here, these deep blues and these bright reds and magentas, these are resistivity signatures. This correlates with the type of rock and its susceptibility to either conduct or resist a signal that is put into the ground. Now, what this means for us here at Atlanta is these deep blue signatures that we see are highly resistive rock. Now, this is our Paleozoic basement, our carbonate rock, our quartzite, and it can also be strong silicification. And with these deep reds and magentas, these are intrusives, volcanic moat sequence, things that have low resistivity signature and allow the signal to pass through quite easily. So this allows us to differentiate between rock types at subsurface. So to kind of point out what we're looking at here, as my cursor circles this is the beginning of the South Quartzite Ridge anticline. So this is kind of that quartzite knob that you get just to the south of the main resource area that acts as essentially a highly resistive cap to the signal from the geophysics. Now, what this means is we've got essentially a highly resistive Eureka quartzite, which is extremely impermeable and not susceptible to mineralization. But what we have below this, as you can see, is a deep plumbing structure with a very strong low resistivity signature. This is hypothesized to be obviously deep-seated plumbing that's coming up and feeding the mineralization here at Atlanta. Here where you see it come to the head of this resistive height is where this intrusive body comes in contact with the impermeable quartzite cap. And what it does is it blows out on either side, depositing mineralization and potentially, grades that are worthy of drilling. And what we've found so far, our southernmost hole that was angled to the south beneath the quartzite cap, HG41, did in fact intersect high-grade, strong mineralization, well distributed over about 50 meters. The trace of that came along this contact. And something that we found here at Atlanta is that these extremes of this CSAMT signature, whether that be the deep reds or the deep blues, these aren't entirely what we are shooting for. It is generally the gradational change of this signature where we get either silicification or decalcification or some kind of structure that is allowing fluid mineralization to come up as a pathway and deposit mineralization. So it's on these boundaries that seem to really be the hot spot here for potential mineralization. As we move south 100 meters, we can see that this deep-seated plume on section 8 is still there. It is coming from the east and verging up to the west. And what you can see here is it hitting this large, highly resistive quartzite cap and again blowing out on the edges. Now this is again completely undrilled target. This is something that we're currently under a minor modification in our plan of operations to build roads and get drill pads up so we can drill along the ridge line of the quartzite ridge. This would test these targets here, this interaction of this low resistive rock with this highly resistive rock, and see if any of these boundaries hold mineralization like we've seen so far in the Atlanta pit. And judging by this strong plumbing signature, clearly we have a serious deep-seated heat source, plumbing source of igneous nature that could be bringing up mineralization and depositing it below this quartzite cap. So we'll move south again to line 7. And again, 100 meters to the south, we can still see the development of this deep-seated intrusive body and this nice sub-horizontal contact here beneath this very large quartzite cap that makes the quartzite ridge. To the right here, where my cursor is the Ely Springs dolomite, which is something that we're familiar with within the Atlanta pit. Again, highly resistive in CSAMT signatures, but also fairly impermeable to mineralization unless there's major structure, which you start to pick up here. If you can see these gradational changes in the contours of the CSAMT, you can tell that there is cross-cutting structures that come through the basement rock. And there's probably a very large structure, again, that runs through here that allows for this major plumbing system to come and intrude beneath this quartzite cap, hit a point of no return where it cannot pass through or blow out to surface because of this quartzite, impermeable quartzite, and again blows out laterally. And this again, all undrill tested. This is a signature that we're really excited to try to get on and see if this holds any value. We're confident with what we've drilled so far in the pit that this is a good chance for having some type of mineralization. Again, we move south to line 6, and what you can start to see is this massive body starts to really develop. We lose the deep plumbing that seems to be just to the north of us, but what we see is a very massive lateral blowout of this low resistive rock. And what's interesting here is you see our quartzite anticlinal cap that we have well developed. Well, now we're starting to have very steep structure cutting through this and faulting it, allowing for either mineralization or alteration to give us this low resistive signature, or we are getting intrusive bodies coming to surface. Now, one thing to note, through field mapping and sampling, we have been traversing this quartzite ridge pretty thoroughly, and we do see rhyolitic dikes and other intrusive bodies coming to surface with historic diggings from the early 1900s. And so clearly there is felsic intrusives that do make it to surface, and we see that in subsurface we can track these near vertical faults that are probably the culprits of that. So main point to kind of draw home is that this trend continues as we are now well 400 meters south of the Atlanta pit. We still see this nice developed impermeable cap of Eureka quartzite above, with a low resistive igneous volcanic body below that could be bringing up the heat and the mineralizing source. 100 meters south, section line 5, we see that we are starting to shallow out here with this sub-horizontal body. We get a nice gradient of potential alteration where we have our CSAMT gradient. It's not necessarily deep red, nor is it deep blue. Again, our quartzite cap here that we've mapped on surface. To the right, here is our dolomite, Paleozoic dolomite rocks that we've mapped on surface, the Ely Springs dolomite. And so we know that these are the signatures that represent both types of lithologies. And again, this untested deep-seated CSAMT low. Now, as we move further south, we can see the development again of a deeper seated plumbing that seems to start to pick back up like we saw in the northernmost sections. And something to touch on over here, this is a steep fault, a major fault structure that seems to be running on the western edge of the Eureka Quartzite Ridge. It runs north-south. And we have a major moat sequence of post-mineral volcanics that give this deep signature of low resistivity material as it's younger and more conductive. And what probably is pogonite limestone here at the basement. And that's one thing to note. As we come further south along the South Quartzite Ridge, we start to pick up pogonite limestone, which is a thinly bedded limestone. It's a great potential host rock, easily mineralized, especially if it underlies an impermeable cap rock such as the Eureka Quartzite. Again, south one more time to section line 4. Again, now we are about 600 meters due south of where we started. We still see this gently plunging, verging to the west, intrusive body coming up along this major developed quartzite cap. And now we start to pick up what seem to also be intrusive bodies coming up along steeply west dipping structure on the west side of the quartzite ridge. Now, this is something, again, field reconnaissance, boots on the ground, that we've seen on surface of, tuffs, volcanic tuffs, as well as intrusive volcanic material on surface from a rhyodacite composition to rhyolitic composition, and is anomalous in gold rock chips and soil samples. Now, line 3 is our second to last slide for the quartzite ridge. Again, it's more of the same. We have our consistent low resistive signature beneath our quartzite ridge. We have what seem to be steeply dipping subvertical structures here and here, where fluids have potential to flow up to subsurface, altering the host rock or the wall rock, and potentially depositing mineralization along these gradients that we see. And again, this is all undrill tested. And we go south one more time, and again. So what we're seeing is a very consistent pattern of a resistive low beneath this highly resistive quartzite cap. And this really indicates to us that this is a blind target, because from what we've gathered from all of our drilling and collecting data out here at Atlanta is the Eureka Quartzite is not a good host rock, and it very, very rarely holds any gold mineralization. And so from traversing and field reconnaissance, you're not going to know that these intrusive bodies lie below this Eureka Quartzite with potential mineralization, because it's essentially a blind target. And it's also pretty inaccessible, and that's why it's been something that hasn't been on priority lists for past explorers to test this as a target, because CSAMT wasn't done at that time, and they didn't know that there was potential sources beneath this quartzite ridge. And so knowing what we know now with our major CSAMT phase 1 and phase 2 programs is that is indeed not correct, and that there is potential for mineralization beneath this South Quartzite Ridge target. And a great thing to see between lines 9 and 2 is the fact that the lateral continuity along strike, about 2.5 kilometers, is we see consistency through each CSAMT section, showing intrusive bodies coming up, hitting that impervious quartzite cap and blowing out laterally like we see here. Now, is it mineralized is the question, and that's something that we hope to answer in the coming months as we get our permits approved and get drill pads and drill roads built to go test these CSAMT targets. And again, let me just rotate up for just kind of spatial awareness of where we're at. We started here at line 9 and worked our way about 2 kilometers south to line 2. And we do have more CSAMT sections down to the south, but these are kind of what I wanted to show to give everyone a really good idea of what we're dealing with in terms of the South Quartzite Ridge proper and the targets that we're looking at.